Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today I have with me Ben Steele. He's the head of data and analytics at BMS Group, the global broker that provides specialist insurance, amongst other things. I'm sure Ben will tell us all about it. So, Ben, welcome to the show. Looking forward to talking to you about delivering huge value, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of value, and how we go about doing that. So, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks, Jason. Wow, huge value. It feels like it's going to be a hard conversation to follow, but really appreciate you inviting me on to the podcast. Really looking forward to the discussion. I must say I'm a big fan of your work. I've actually recently purchased 6 of your Data Me's business books.
Love to hear that.
And have sort of circulated them, sort of dotted them across the business for some of our business folks to pick up and read at their leisure. So yeah, super happy with that. And I must say that you had me at leveling up. Feels a bit like an inside joke, but there's a tip for everybody to go ahead and read that book.
Yeah, well, the level up framework is where it's at. So, no, I appreciate that, and I'm pleased because the book was written with the kind of like the lens on it being consumable for, can I say it, non-data people, or people certainly that aren't sort of data professionals, and the broader business conversation. So I'm glad that you read that and felt that was the right thing to do. So appreciate that. And you have much brownie points from me now, Ben. Thank you.
I'll take that. I'll take that for sure.
They cannot be converted into real money. Is the disclaimer. So yeah, do you want to just introduce yourself a bit? What you're up to now, a bit of your background, how you sort of like wandered into data. It'd be great just to kick off with that.
Wandered is a good choice of words, actually, Joseph. So I've recently joined BMS Group. That's actually a really fast-growing global insurance and reinsurance specialty broker based here in London, but with offices. I think it's 24 offices and counting across the globe. So I head up their data analytics team. Joined back end of last year. 25 years in financial services, showing my age a little bit. So I was thinking about that sort of over the Christmas and New Year period. I guess some of my life's experiences in the data space. Most of actually that 25 years has been roles in and out of data, very business facing, operational in nature. And I guess prior to BMS, so I worked for a big specialist commercial insurer called Brit Insurance for best part of 20 years. Again, similar role there in the sense that I sort of built and led the data analytics team there for a number of years. So lots of experience, lots of scars, war stories, and successes actually. So I'm looking forward to unpacking some of my experiences in this conversation.
Great. And yeah, someone, there's sort of data expertise, and then there's industry expertise. So being in data and financial services for that amount of time, you certainly, that the cross of that is certainly your sweet spot. So looking forward to hearing how you've managed to kind of deliver value, what good and lots of value looks like. So I suppose just to kind of get us going, lots of conversations we have are about identifying the value that you can deliver and then building an organization that's capable of delivering it, right?
Yes.
But often that kind of conversation about, well, what do we mean by value? How do we identify it? Is like the starting point for everything, really. And people do struggle with that, frankly, or they don't consider it as much as they should, and they focus on building capabilities without really thinking about value. So just sort of that idea of value, talk to me about that and how you sort of center around sort of delivering value.
That's a great question to get us started. And I find it actually quite fascinating because I think, I try and stretch the word value to sort of almost anchor on the word's impact. Because I think that sometimes, look, and I come from a background of working in relatively low data maturity businesses. So they're very much at a different stage in their life cycle from a data analytics standpoint. But I've got 2 or 3 examples of things that we can unpack in terms of specific initiatives or deliverables from previous roles. We could probably use those to level set and sort of hang some of the conversation against. So first, and they're all very different. So I deliberately picked three that are at different ends of the scale. So
Okay.
first one, major transformation. So as I say, in my previous role at Brit Insurance, we built the first digital and algorithmically, easy for me to say, trained insurance syndicate,
Right.
which went live in 2021. So we launched that in 2020. That's now that's right underwriting over $1 billion of premium a year. So
Right.
that's a massive growth business, and it was essentially built from the ground up. Second example, which we can unpack, is I'd describe this as a smaller effort, but with outsized results. So that was a relatively small proprietary piece of analytics that was built back in sort of similar time frame, actually, that we've used to generate tens and tens of millions of additional revenue, and that's annually reoccurring revenue. So that's great. And then lastly, sort of more close to home, but I would argue again with the value lens in mind, is I guess the role of a leader sort of day to day in terms of how they're using data to drive high performing outcomes within their team. So I can talk quite openly, I think, about the work I did to create arguably probably the world's smallest but richest data set that was used to enable the creation of as I say, a market leading team, high performing team. And really that was more about the conversations that it enabled opposed to the data in its purest form. So I only land on those because I think value is in the eyes of the beholder. And I would say that's that conversation looked and felt very differently across all three of those examples, which is interesting in its own right? Because again, for some it's about bottom line, for others it's about top line, for others it's just about being able to enable something to be done more effectively, right? So
well, what's great, A, about those examples, and B, just the way you explain the kind of the lens on it, right? The context about top line, bottom line, or something else, is that this is about making impact in some way, and this isn't about borrowing what someone else down the road did, or a competitor did, or another company did. It's about what's right for you based on your business strategy, your growth strategy, your operational requirements, and then shaping what you do around those things. So if it's about top line, well, let's find the things that are about top line that help us grow it. But what I really love, and I can't wait to get into this example, is the use of data to help build the kind of team. This is about focusing on individuals and people. You often can talk about revenue and growth and market share and all these things, but actually to use data to build a team that you want and it is effective and high performing. Great use case, certainly a great impactful outcome if you can get that right. So let's unpick some of those. But before we do, I'm quite interested, and as I talk to different people from different organizations, what is needed to have in place in order to deliver value. And I mean that in a kind of mindset way. There's sort of physical things you need, of course, but what do you need in place? What environment do we need to create that allows us to focus on delivering, or has allowed you to focus on delivering that level of value?
That is a great question. And it takes me back to, I did a leadership and strategy course at London Business School, I think probably 10 years ago, again, showing my age. And the lecture, I remember it was sort of 10 minutes in, lecture put up a triangle on the board. I think he drew it actually. It was a whiteboard, wasn't digital at that point. And there was just 3 points. Point 1 was strategy, the idea. Point 2 was alignment, and point 3 was execution. And he sort of walked around the triangle and said, "Look, the reality is no business is ever short on ideas. Right? That's rarely the problem. Albeit not all ideas are equal, but there's never normally a strategy problem of sorts. I will come back to that about whether the strategy is actually as clear as it needs to be for people to be able to enact it. But actually, the two with it, me having a strong people focus, actually, I aligned on the other two they resonated quite a bit. Again, organizations, particularly sort of high execution focused organizations, will go straight to, right, we've got a strategy now, let's get on and make that happen. Which isn't in itself necessarily wrong, but I think the risk is it highlights blind spots about, well, do we have the skills we need? And being, I guess, grown up and open enough to accept the fact that actually some of these skills we don't currently have. So we may well need to recruit those, or we may well need to upskill people. And I'm just talking purely from a delivery standpoint, let alone the sort of the wider business in terms of the broader business change. And then alignment was the one that I was probably the most curious about. So I pulled the thread on that a little bit, and it's sort of taken me off on an interesting leadership journey for the last probably decade or so, which was around, ultimately in my mind, the biggest single success factor or failure factor here is the ability to be able to take an organization of 500,000, 10,000 people and align them in a way that delivers on business goals. That's people, that's politics, that's process, that's bureaucracy, and it's everything else in between, really. And I think from my own experience, and I've got good project experiences of where this has worked well, and I've also some that are less positive in terms of their outcome, but certainly the sort of light research I've done with firms that do this well, there's a heavy focus on solving for that alignment challenge. And it's at the heart of the work that's ongoing. It's not a nice to have, it's not comms in change management, it's much more deeply rooted than that, philosophical almost, in terms of the approach.
So it's a cultural alignment with a specific thing, or just general alignment about all, across the board, because it's quite hard to get everyone marching in the same direction sort of perfectly aligned. It is but it's a sort of general direction of travel, do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of almost just like a layer cake, right? So, there's a broader context about, do we all understand where we're heading as a business or as a business unit? I think when it comes to sort of project and transformational work, it's about sort of aligning behind that vision, that North Star, etc. I mean, I think one of the examples I gave earlier, which is major transformation, I mean, it's basically going to revolutionize this industry, sort of key insurance, this algo-based insurance syndicate. That was essentially the vision of two outstanding exec leaders within Brit Insurance, that business, Matthew Wilson, the ex-CEO, and Mark Allen, who's now the CEO of Key. Without that vision, that frankly doesn't happen. Without the commitment, without the acknowledgement that level of change was going to be positively disruptive, but also had its challenges and would have its challenges along the way, and having the courage of convictions, the sort of the mindset, the focus to be able to lead that level of change, which, I say, beyond that, revolutionizing that business will fundamentally change this industry. That's at the heart of essentially forging alignment, because if you've got top down mindset culture, then certainly in organizations that are hierarchical, they're more command and control cultures, you really do give yourself the best chance. And then it's just about how that then embodies and embeds into the broader organization in terms of change.
It's it's a really interesting sort of alignment around a North Star, alignment around a vision, alignment around an idea. You've talked about there, rather than the nuts and bolts of alignment around the way we're going to do this piece of data engineering, or alignment around how we're going to move from test into production, which are all like important bits of the jigsaw, but without this kind of direction, without the kind of alignment to the thing that we're trying to achieve, all of that stuff just becomes stuff, not valuable contributions to reaching the goal that we're trying to achieve. So what it's quite philosophical almost. It's quite it's sort of about mindset. It's about that breeds the environment you need to create value.
Absolutely. And I again, I found it was just looking at some of my old notes from previous roles over the weekend. And there's quite a famous chap who works in sort of change, who has done for decades, called John Cotter. I think he's a doctor, actually, Dr. John Cotter. He's written many books and many papers on sort of change management. And he's got this sort of codified 8 steps which starts with sort of that creating essentially that North Star,
Mm.
and it goes through the sort of, if you like, the implementation journey, the sort of functional aspects of change, but then
Yeah.
lands on embedding, building, and evolving essentially. And I think because the mindset, the philosophy, and the functional aspects are so interwoven,
Yeah.
I think for some it's easy for them to lose sight of essentially the importance of some of those things.
Mm.
Again, they can be occasionally regarded as a nice to have, or actually they get in the way of trying to get the work done.
Yeah.
But organizations that are, embarking on multi-million pounds, £100 million transformation efforts, I'm sure that if we asked them the question, how ready do you think this organization is for change?
Mm.
Either you would, I think probably most firms would struggle to give a clear answer,
Mm.
or at least a consistent answer. So sort of, I think understanding that context and an organization's readiness before change is started, and then obviously managing
Yeah.
through that feels to me like it's immensely powerful. Yet I don't know of many organizations that do that
No. I mean,
upfront work.
most people are almost trying to change as they go,
Yeah,
and then force isn't quite the right word, but force change to happen
yeah,
through positive strategies and approaches. But having a culture where change is accepted, change is wanted, change is okay, and people
yeah,
that want to kind of either iteratively or transformationally change is in some ways a very different conversation, but in some ways is at the heart of being able to
yeah,
deliver value, because value tends to come from making a change in something. Obviously, keep the status quo. Nothing, no big movement will happen, but value comes from making that kind of improvement all the time. But I think your point earlier about this triangle is important. So we've got the alignment, which helps us sort
yeah.
of lined up, collaborative towards a common goal, but the execution is important. The bits that make it happen,
Yes.
then is where you've got the heart is, and the strategy gives you the what are we trying to achieve here? What's our plan? What's the way we're going to solve this problem of getting to the outcome that we want to achieve?
Yeah, you're right, and I think we talked before about that sort of intersection between the need to build out these sort of, I call it sort of enterprise muscle, right, from a
Mm.
data and
Yeah.
technology standpoint,
Mm.
but without oversizing on building too much muscle that it frankly isn't needed, and
Yeah.
isn't a good use of anybody's time or investment. So therefore, then it's the specific business goals that drive and again, it's in your leveling up framework talks, I think, really nicely and very, very clearly about the need to be able to manage those two things,
Yeah.
which, theoretically makes a whole lot of sense, right? And I think, most firms that are embarking on technology or data-led change will be thinking about it in that way,
Yeah.
but it's still quite challenging, right? So it's because getting that balance right, there's no obvious answer to that work. Some of that is, again, very intellectually led. There's a logic right brain that's sort of saying, well, no, the right answer is clearly this, but then there's the heart that needs to be
Yeah.
played into from
Onto it.
an organizational standpoint, in order to, again, make sure we're not seeing the erosion of any investment or any return on investment. And I think things like culture and data literacy and all of those things that are now becoming quite commonplace, but also somewhat overused.
Mm.
It's what do they actually mean, right, within the context of a given organization and their specific change efforts.
Yeah. And I agree. And there's certainly a concept that I sort of buy into and position on this, which is you kind of have to earn the right to spend money, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
And you earn the right to spend money, by having credibility, of course, and having a good plan and having a good strategy and all the rest of it. But by delivering value and proving value is how you earn the right to spend more money. And I think and it goes both ways, right? I think an organization should, and obviously budgets dependent, but should back someone when they've delivered value, and but also take a bit of a leap of faith to help them to deliver some value in the first place. So I think it's a little bit about balance there on culturally, how do you budget? Culturally, how do you allocate funds? But equally
Yes.
provide, once they've earned the right to deliver value, let them deliver more. and not just look at it as a continued sort of cost and money out the door, but the upside, which is what this is about, delivering value. So let's dig a bit, right? So you talked about sort of some good examples there, but I'm interested in execution. Just came up.
Yes.
I'm interested in, you got to do this at pace. Is my kind of theory, and I've seen in practice that that's what really does make the difference. But doing anything at pace is hard, and it requires lots of things to be in the right place. Culturally and physically and all the rest of it. So how and I don't know how quick some of these things were delivered for you, but just how do you go about delivering value at pace in the backdrop of legacy systems and legacy platforms and new mindsets to change, a different culture that you need to put in place?
Yeah, so I'd agree absolutely. You have to be able to deliver at pace and repeatedly. I'd add to that as well.
Not one trick pony. Yeah,
exactly. So, and again, the three examples are like I called out earlier. I think they're good case studies for this. So, I think it's a less known fact that it was two fantastic data scientists within my old team at Brit that built the proof of concept algorithm for Key. I mean, that was work that was done in, I would say, sort of 8 to 10 weeks as a POC, to prove that actually this was viable, that this would work, and this is something that, crikey, now we need to build at scale. So we'll definitely come back to that specific point. But I think in all three examples, actually, value was proved, the hypothesis was tested within a matter of weeks. Right, to sort of to confirm the viability, shape the idea, the solution, etc., before we then embarked on a heavier investment, sort of trying to industrialize and get these things into sort of a live production state. So actually, all three sort of followed a fairly similar model. Obviously, the duration from sort of test and learn into sort of deploy. Those timeframes were different, but that business Key was launched within sort of, I think, probably about 8 to 9 months. So to go from a POC through regulatory approval and get to launch, actually the sort of technology and the sort of data aspects of that were doable, right, in that time frame with the right resources. So what was essentially two fantastic data scientists that then handed that over to an external team from UCL and with support from Google and the wider sort of Brit team to be able to then take that into a production state. So having the early test solve for that, none of that's new news to you, Jason. I'm sure that comes up in pretty much every conversation you have with other data leaders. And then it's having the capability, whether it's internal, external, or more often than not a combination of the two, that can then accelerate that work quickly, which raises a lot of other interesting challenges about coordination. How do you get the work appropriately planned and executed, but all very, very, very doable. With the other two examples that followed a fairly similar model, much lower scale, right? So we were able to take those straight from a POC into something that was live and useful, again, probably in less than 3 months. So the scale allowed that, but essentially it was still the same challenges that needed to be embraced. It was still the same processes that needed to be followed. It's interesting because I think actually there's almost a risk that we overcomplicate what execution looks like. It's a combination of skills. It's a combination of, again, that mindset point and having a good, believable, credible, and aggressive but achievable plan.
Well, I think you make the important point there about delivering quickly is proving value quickly. And you said there, proof of concepts, prove value. And so the question I was sort of interrupting you, but was have you got examples of where you ran a minimum viable product or proof of concept that then you didn't then scale because it wasn't successful or it ran out of steam?
Yeah. So actually, a few with our analytics and data science team in its first couple of years. So our first foray in my previous role into analytics and data science in that form was 2018. So the first really year for that team was learning the business, again, trying to get technical folks, very bright and clever technical folks, into business conversations, not trying to pull business folks into a
Yeah.
a data or statistical debate, and try and work through and test what the art of the possible was in the data science and analytics space. Several tests in that time didn't necessarily prove to be viable, or didn't necessarily, support a hypothesis. But actually, over time, I think, again, back to that point about getting collaboration, the sweet spot of collaboration is making more informed decisions about what those tests and what those POCs are in the first place. So over time, you see actually quite a sharp reduction in the number of failed experiments or failed tests. Now, one could argue that's a consequence of, I guess, a lack of ambition. But in relatively low maturity businesses, there's so much opportunity out there.
Got to get through them.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think the sweet spot for me for collaboration is that business conversation where you've got bright, capable people who can then essentially turn that into a meaningful and credible set of tests or a hypothesis to prove, etc. And then that acceleration through to being able to prove the results, prove the concept, prove the value is absolutely critical, right? And obviously, the shorter that cycle, as disruptive as that might be, then that's a great space to be in.
Yeah, it's a couple of bits then to pick up on that, because you mentioned sort of as you started talking about delivering proof of concepts that I know this, as in you said that to me. I know this, and I'm sure everybody I talk to does that. Not everybody does. And not everybody does because they think that slows them down rather than speeds them up. So jump to the answer. We've got a thing we want to build. Let's go build it because we're building it. So it feels like we're going quickly, rather than, well, let's test something. Let's let's make sure this is valuable. Let's make sure it adds value. Let's make sure in a lo-fi minimum kind of way, it does what we want it to do. Then we can scale it. That actually gets you to a value quicker, even though it doesn't necessarily get you to the product quick, the end product might not be as quick, but the value is delivered quicker. And I think that's the kind of important bit there. Is a little bit like slow down to speed up, pick the right things that will add value rather than just do all the things to be busy and try and deliver value. And I think that's a really important message, I think, for delivering lots of value, is pick the right things to go after.
That's spot on. And you took me back to a conversation I had with a chief data officer in this industry actually last year, who talked about what clearly was their baby, this really big complex solution that had been built that actually, from a technology and from a statistical standpoint, actually sounded quite impressive. I left that conversation no one sure what the use case was and what the value was, right? So and I think I've heard since that any further development on that, having spent probably a few million, has been paused. So you're right, we've all, data leaders, business leaders, technology leaders, we've all got our blind spots at points. And I think you're right. The challenge is putting sort of delivery of value at the forefront of all of this work. It's not to diminish the importance of, making sure these things are built on sound footings. But back to the point, we're only as good as our last win. And I think the importance to manage that conversation and that evolution from, okay, well, yes, we think this is valuable. Actually, you can extract value right now. There are a number of things that we need to do to get that into a position where that's, a fully productionized, industrialized solution, product, whatever we want to call it. And again, sort of I was talking to my 15-year-old son last week, and it sort of dawned on me, this obsession with sort of technical and data teams wanting to show their work. The data scientist that wants to show an exec member the Python notebook is and an exec member just wants to know whether the thing actually, whether it works, right? I think it's driven by sort of our formative years, probably secondary school, where for all those sort of STEM subjects,
to show your workings,
we are pushed into sharing our workings, right? So there's a sort of mindset shift from, clearly they need to exist, and clearly someone will be interested in those at the point of validation and test. But again, sort of knowing the audience and understanding that actually what somebody at the other end of the conversation, the other side of the table, etc., is possibly interested in is will this work? Does it work? When can I get it? What's the value, etc. So I think that context is so important to land this type of work, these types of initiatives effectively.
Yeah.
And it does require it's so nuanced. Even within the same organization, context can shift. It's so
Yeah.
nuanced, and sort of, I think good data leaders are able to sort of read the room. They're able to sort of read that context and navigate effectively, and be a little less precious about the right way or the only way. And it's just about finding the way.
Pragmatically, how do we deliver the value?
Exactly.
That's the conversation that needs to be had. Pragmatically, how do we deliver the value, and less about what's the perfect product, perfect solution that delivers it. But we've got to get to the right answer, because you lose opportunity. The value can diminish. It can go away quickly. If you miss, just in like a retailer at Christmas, if they miss the boat, then Christmas is gone. They've missed the opportunity. So don't perfect. You want it good enough to deliver the value, and that's what we're aiming at.
Progress, not perfection.
Love that. How just kind of the final area I'd like to explore actually is this idea of deciding or upfront explaining how much value something will deliver. Kind of classic business case of this will deliver X amount of value, versus iteratively finding that out. We've just talked about how we might sort of test some things first and then build them out. So targeting an amount of value or budget business casing an amount of value, and then how you track the value that you have or are delivering. So there's sort of two sides. How you identify what value you're aiming to deliver, and then how do you track that you are?
Again, great questions. I think the added complication on the first question is, often, from my experience, most solutions serve more than one business case. So actually, sometimes it becomes more compelling as we start to think about the reusability of what sits under the bonnet, essentially, for other use cases. So great question. And my experience over the last probably couple of decades is I've seen many times where business leaders, let alone the technologists or data folks, are reluctant to put numbers against the business case. Which I find, somewhat fascinating. So there's often that challenge to be faced into. I've encouraged my own teams over the years to be a bit bolder in that approach. Again, seeing the philosophical shift to, well, look, if we put a number down on a piece of paper, if it's a range, that isn't for anybody to be, held accountable to, right? In a sense that if this is our direction of travel, we will continue to test against that. We would expect the number, it's a prediction, right, at a point in time. And as we do the work, we would expect that to evolve. That could be a challenge early on, trying to get funding, particularly in a waterfall style governance model where, we're trying to operate in a more agile delivery fashion. But it definitely isn't easy. It definitely is. And actually, where I've seen the biggest traction is where we've been able to do early work with somebody who's firmly on the business side to better understand their particular product line of business, their particular business unit, and sort of again go deep into a business conversation and sort of pull out even a conservative view of what this could look like. Trying to get business folks comfortable with that is not easy, for sure.
It's certainly, and you can understand people's reluctance, reticence, nervousness about putting a number on something that will be delivered in 3 years' time at such an early formative stage of a project, and then everything that comes with that in terms of career and worries about what happens, all that's good stuff. But one of the ways I've seen do this, and I wondered if you'd go here, is those proof of concepts that you do is partly to prove that value can be delivered, and some steer identity about how much value could be delivered in one business line or one part of the business or for one person, so that you can then go, well, there's a model here that I can build on, rather than before you've even done anything go, well, if we could improve revenue by 2%, this is how good it would be. Do you know what I mean? It sort of used that as a way to validate that there is some value, and to validate that there might be some more value, and then chip away and deliver the next block of value until you've proven that, this will work at scale. And then we can go, I think over the next 3 years, we can deliver this amount because we've done some work to prove it.
It's definitely a great model. And I think actually it lends itself really well to insurance businesses that normally operate across a broad range of product lines.
Right.
because you could again you prove the concept in a given product line that shows immediate value for that product, but
Mm.
actually then you've got to be then the ability to be able to shift that into other lines, I think, and therefore then the work for whilst we're looking at proven value in one product line, we're already doing the thinking, we're already doing the sort of the discovery, if you like, across other product lines. So what's suitable, how does it fit, the characteristics of each product.
Yeah.
I think there's a sort of almost a logical map into organization that says if we start here and we prove value, well, where do we go next? Bit like
Yeah.
a board game,
Yeah.
snakes and ladders.
Yeah.
It's sort of mapping out what that board looks like to sort of go, okay, well, there's the implementation for a product, but there's the, okay, well, where do we go next? Either with the functionality, with the
Yeah.
technology, with the solution, and or the sort of product line or business unit. So I think you're right. The two sort of go hand in hand because one's building value, it's building momentum, creates a bit of FOMO, frankly, in other parts of the business.
Yeah.
Then making choice decisions about where to go next, based on, I guess, the viability of the solution from a value standpoint, but also culturally, right? So who's ready for it? Who's knocking down the door saying we want to be next? It's far easier to deploy and sort of deliver solutions in this space to a target audience that is sort of ready, willing, and able.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the analogy of find the ladders.
Yes, definitely
Find the
find the
ladders.
ladders and avoid the snakes.
Avoid the snakes, of course. Yeah. Great. Well, yeah, loads there to consider. It's great to have a conversation about delivering value that talks to culture, it talks to ambition, it talks to execution, it talks to alignment, it talks to strategy. It's the things that really drive value forward. Rather than sort of really detailed kind of conversation about the tools you need, the technologies you need, the processes you need, which of course is all enabling stuff, but without this kind of view and visibility about direction and alignment and culture, the rest is you're always going to be fighting a battle of wading through treacle, to use the analogy, which can be really challenging. Create the path in front of you, I think, is what all those things give you, so that it smooths the journey somewhat.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think you made the point. I think you used the term credible a couple of times in this conversation. It is about credible delivery, right? So, the business wants to see that, it will wine and dine out on good, credible delivery as it does a business, right? In terms of its own business goals.
Yeah.
Clearly, those other things need to exist. And in an ideal world, we would love for everybody to care about the structures, the processes, the working practices, the technology, the frameworks, etc. But the challenge of a data leader is to build those things, often alongside technology leaders, is to build those things while serving the business, not instead of, and not at a cost of. So I think that, again, that balance between the intersection of building capability and delivering value is an art form, is an absolute art form, and anybody who gets that right, I think is that's the recipe for success.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, awesome. Thanks for coming on the show, Ben. It's been a great discussion. Love your sort of thoughtful mindset on this, and clearly well read on the topic as well as some real practical experience of delivering a large amount of value. So appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for being here.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And thanks everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed today's show, and we will catch you again soon.